welcome back to Beating a Dead Horse. As always, I am your host, Sean McKinda.
Jackson.
Oh, I guess my co-host has been zombified, which makes sense because we're talking about Jackson. All right, hang on. We gotta talk for a second here, okay? This is largely my fault, but our intros have gotten weaker because I have found it harder and harder to segue into something that doesn't sound like me just forcing it. Jellicle indeed. That's not helpful, but jellicle indeed.
Oh wow! I've just received the vaccine. Wow! I'm filled with the power of love, and I've come back to life. Love for you and the show and our viewers.
See, that's helpful. That's something we can do. And with that, you might say that you have a warm body.
I'm very warm, actually. It's pretty warm in here. I should turn the heat down. The problem is that where my desk is, it's right over like the baseboard heat. So if I turn the heat up, my room is actually pretty cold unless it's really hot. But I'm like,
wait, hang on. Let me just break that down. Your room is pretty cold unless it's really hot.
Well,
yes, that tends to be how the world functions.
Well, I mean, it's more specifically that like even if I have my thermostat at a reasonable temperature, it won't permeate throughout the room correctly because it all gets trapped by my desk. So then, I turn up the heat really high, so I do feel it. And then I go over to my desk and it's like a sauna. You can just feel it billowing out. Anyway, we're talking about fucking warm bodies.
Yes. And you know what? I'm not even that worried that like this intro has been an absolute mess because secret, no one is going to listen to this episode.
At least with cats, we had like powerful meme energy. Like people still enjoy clowning on cats. We have no excuse for this.
No, I just picked a movie that popped into my... Jackson, you have to stop letting me do this because this has been fucking Cowboys and Aliens and now Warm Bodies. And Warm Bodies is no Cowboys and Aliens. Let's get
absolutely
right
not
ahead of that. No, Warm Bodies is actually not terrible. And we'll talk about that in a second here. But the problem is I keep just picking movies that I'm like, oh yeah, I've been thinking about this. And they're movies that no one else has thought about in anywhere from 7 to 10 years. And so there goes any sort of SEO we might have had. Nobody's going to be looking for a podcast on warm bodies in the goddamn year of our Lord 2021.
I mean, when we come back, whenever the Horsecast is resurrected, like after my Japan shit gets sorted out, like do we just have to come back as like a early like 2010s movie podcast? Because that's the common thread, is that like we keep, and I keep agreeing to these, like I'm allowing you to do this, so I'm at least partially to blame. And the reason I keep agreeing to these is that like Warm Bodies was very much in that same category as Cowboys and Aliens with a much better result, but it was very much in that same category of like movies I remember seeing the trailers for as like a teenager and seeing and like talking to people about, but never actually seeing, and like still kind of being a little curious. Like even though I'd never seen the movie while watching this, like I remembered a lot of shots from the trailer. It was pretty memorable to me, but I never watched it. And so I think on its own merits, it's kind of a fun idea to go back to like some weird like double A, like kind of obscure lost to time stuff. I mean, that's like Tucker and Dale is not quite the same thing, but it's sort of in that vein, like sort of
Tucker and Dale has a cult following to it though, and like honestly, I really am surprised that Warm Bodies does not have more of a cult following to it. It feels like a movie that should.
I agree. I think I have kind of a thesis on that, and I mentioned it a bit in the pre-discussion, but we can get to that later because this movie's very fun. I had a very enjoyable time with it, but I could see how it would struggle to find an audience, which is weird because it came out like at the nexus of like two really big trends. It was kind of the end days of the Twilight, like YA paranormal romance trend. And it was also sort of it never fully ended, I don't think, but like, you know, zombies is a big thing. Like I tend to think of the last time people were like super hype about a zombie thing was the original Last of Us. And for me, at least the way that I see it in my mind, this isn't substantiated at all. So like, you know, don't jump up my ass if I'm getting something wrong, viewers. But like in my mind, it's like The Last of Us came out. Everyone's like, okay, we have our big like Oscar bait zombie game, like the sad boy drama zombie game that's really popular and really critically acclaimed. And from there, the zombie thing just slowly started to peter out. And, you know, there's still zombie games, there's still zombie movies, like, you know, there was Zombieland and all that shit. But like, they're not as like, you couldn't escape fucking zombies when we were in high school. It was everywhere. Everyone had like, you know, zombie memes and shit. Like people were obsessed.
You're entirely right that this movie felt like it really should have landed in that sweet spot. And it's worth mentioning before we really dive super far into it, what this movie is and why it, despite landing in that sweet spot, honestly kind of transcends it. So first and foremost, if you're unfamiliar with the Warm Bodies, which I imagine most people are, it was a 2013 movie starring Cyclops from Nicholas Hoult, right? Nick Hoult?
Yeah, Nux, the war boy.
Is that Nux?
That's Nux, yeah.
Oh my god, I didn't realize that, actually. Holy shit.
He lives, he dies, he lives again.
Starring Nux the War Boy as a zombie, as well as Rob Corddry, who's just a weird pull in general as another zombie. But it's a star-crossed lovers thing where the zombie falls in love with a human girl and shenanigans and horror comedy happen, essentially. I don't want to spoil too much about it because it goes weird places. But as your first thought's gonna be like, oh, okay, this feels like a movie 47 type of spin the thing on its head. You know, why would you date a zombie? It's Twilight. Shit, it's really not. It is surprisingly, just in general, like it is a surprisingly earnest movie. It does its own thing across the board. It treats itself with seriousness that it deserves. Like, it's well aware that it's kind of a goofy movie, but it doesn't like, haha, why would anyone do this? This is so stupid. It very much treats itself with the seriousness that it deserves. It also doesn't necessarily feel like a run-of-the-mill zombie movie of the era. Like, it really kind of transcends that too. I was talking to Jackson. I think that if you told me that with one glaring exception, this movie came out a year or two ago, 2018, 2017, I wouldn't have batted an eye. I'm like, yo, yeah, that makes sense. This feels like kind of a weird art house movie that would have come out in 2017, 2018. So it really does, despite the fact that it is in that nexus of so many things, transcend that nexus. And if you are listening to this and thinking, well, it does sound like a dumb, weird Twilight ripoff, you know what? Treat yourself to it. It's not what you think it is, and it's also probably better than you think it is. It is a charming, earnest movie in a lot of ways. It's not without its flaws. It's deeply, deeply flawed, and we'll talk about that, but it is worth mentioning that it is still worth your time.
Yeah, I pretty much completely agree on all counts. I think if you're at all into the like horror comedy sort of thing, I mean, even if you just like, you know, I'd recommend it to like people who are into like horror comedies, like kind of some Tucker and Dale vibes, but less extreme because it's PG-13. I mean, if you were into the whole like YA, like Twilight paranormal romance thing, like back in the day, I mean, I would recommend it for you as well. I think that it's got some good gags in that direction, and yeah, like this movie is very charming. It's very well made. It's very in control of its tone for the most part. The writing's a little sloppy here and there, but like not in a way that ruins your enjoyment of the movie.
I would ascribe a lot of that to the fact that it is like a 90-minute adaptation. I mean, that's another just tick in its favor, by the way. It is like 96 minutes.
Yes.
It's so easy to watch.
And it doesn't feel longer than that. This isn't
No, you sit down with it, you watch it for 96 minutes, you go, that was 96 minutes. I had a grand old time with it, and move on. Honestly, I think a better question in general is like, is there anyone that you really wouldn't recommend this movie to, because I think that it is so generally crowd pleasing in a lot of ways. Like I'm trying to think of like anyone who, if they're like, hey, should I watch this? I would tell them no. I might be like, it's fine. I don't know that you're gonna love it or anything like that, but like I can't imagine like if my mother or sister who don't like zombie movies that much, if they came up and like, hey, should I watch this? I'd be like, you know what? Yeah, I mean, you probably get something out of it. Go for it. My dad, who isn't a big on romance movies, but like zombie movies, yeah, go for it. Like, it's funny. It's still charming. I really cannot imagine telling anyone, no, don't watch this movie.
No, I think I agree. I think the reason that like I was thinking specifically about like who I would recommend it to is because we're kind of at the point, unless I missed it and it's more easily accessible on like a streaming service that you can just like kind of throw on without thinking about it. It's like that extra step. Like I had to go like rent it from Amazon. And
yeah, it is like $4 to rent, which is a bummer. But I mean,
yeah, no, because if this were just like on Netflix and like, you know, you could turn it on and have a time, easy recommendation for, yeah, just about anybody. The reason I was being more specific in my recommendations is that like with that kind of thing, I know that like, unless it's like something that's going to like blow your fucking mind, it can be it can be difficult to like get off your ass and like go and actually like seek something out, let alone pay for it. You know,
you're definitely right. This is, if we weren't doing this for, I mean, I would, because I'm stupid and just like occasionally get in moods. But if I were someone less inclined to watch movies, I think you're definitely right on that. This would be an incredibly easy rec on Netflix or Hulu or whatever. Like,
yeah.
Just for a really easy comparison, I watched Buffaloed last night with Sam, which is basically low rent Wolf of Wall Street set in Buffalo in a lot of ways. It's great, but it's great in a way that it's on Hulu and you should watch it. I don't know that I'd recommend you go pay for it type of movie.
Right. And I think that like this is unique and fun enough that I would recommend certain sects of people to check it out. For your average viewer, again, I don't know how many people are going to get off their ass to like pay to rent this, but it is good. It like you won't, if you do choose to do that, you won't be disappointed. You'll have a good time. So
it's like $5. You could have spent that $5 in worse places.
100%.
So I think we're kind of brushing up against things. Like it's clear that we both really like this movie. Is there anything that we want to talk about in the pre-spoiler discussion, or do we want to kind of call spoilers a bit earlier than we usually do?
Yeah, I guess I'll say one last thing. I'll give my hypothesis for why this didn't get kind of the cult following that other movies may have. And it's basically,
is it advertising? I bet it's advertising.
Kind of.
Oh, okay. That's my gut reaction when somebody's like, "This did not get the recognition it deserves." Kind of like Jennifer's Body is the movie I was thinking of. Another one of those like horror revenge stories that was marketed like this weird, sexy murder story, and it is. Like it was very much Megan Fox, like wearing scantily clad clothing.
They were really leading into
yeah,
that. Yeah,
and very much like this dude bro movie, and it's more of like this feminist pastiche. Honestly, the marketing was terrible for it.
No, I don't think the marketing for this was necessarily bad, because I remember the trailers, and like the trailers were not, you know, unlike it sounds like, I haven't seen Jennifer's Body, but I do remember the ads for it. It wasn't like the trailers betrayed the content of the movie. Like it was pretty accurate, but I do think it's unfortunate that by being at sort of the nexus, a very gendered nexus, not to say that like, you know, women didn't enjoy zombie stories or that men couldn't enjoy something like Twilight, but like, you know, in terms of marketing, especially at the time, like, you know, those things were very gendered. And I think that this was caught in a weird middle ground where, like, you know, zombie like dude bros who were fantasizing about living the post-apocalyptic LARP life or whatever, like looked at this and saw the like Beauty and Beast, Romeo and Juliet elements and were like, ew, like this is icky for girls, like Twilight but with zombies. And then
the girls said the exact same thing, just inverted, which is gross, Twilight but with zombies.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like,
Zombies inherently are just not sexy. I don't care if you get Nicholas Hoult in there. I mean, fucking, you can have a vampire be sexy because it's 17 forever or whatever. Which, I mean, listen, that raises a whole bunch of different questions. Don't misunderstand what I am saying right here and right now.
can't wait for that to get clipped out of context.
I followed that up as immediately as I could, and it will be harder to do it then because I'm not saying that there are reasons Age of Consent is the way it is, and the criticisms of fucking goddamn Vampire Boy in Twilight being 300 is also incredibly valid and something we're gonna talk about. But they can still be pretty and young and hot. Meanwhile, zombies, by their very nature, are literally decaying flesh sacks, which isn't hot.
No, and the movie, like, leans into this at times. Like, you think about the fact that, like, if you're gonna smooch a zombie, you're gonna be tasting the brain that he just ate, let alone his, like, decaying flesh.
It's way more... As weird as this is going to be another weird sentence, don't get me wrong. It's way more palatable to imagine kissing someone who had drank of human blood than ate of human flesh.
Yeah, like you know, eating brains. Zombies are gnarly, and like that's part of what makes the movie work is that like there's some decent comedy and like, you know, it knows how to play the tone and it's playful and like dark in the right places, but not like too dark, you know? But I could see that like this would have been a very difficult movie to market because yeah, on the surface, it's like if you want to, you know, this was obviously, even though this movie came about because like some, you know, executive was chomping on his cigar and saying, "Hey, what's popular? We got Twilight, we got zombies. It was this Twilight zombie book, perfect. Put it in production." But like, so you know, that would have been why the movie got greenlit. But that's not all there is to the movie. The movie's pretty well made and fun. You know, like it was greenlit to ride on coattails, but the movie itself doesn't really.
The movie itself features Rob Corddry at one point as a zombie, just going, "Bitches." And it is perhaps the funniest fucking line in media, honestly. Like, if that doesn't tell you everything you need to know about what Warm Bodies is, I don't know what will. And, like, Rob Corddry just constantly keeps talking and saying just utterly wild things that don't make sense for... He swears nonstop throughout this movie, and he's a zombie, and it's wild and great. Rob Corddry is so good in this movie. He is perfect for it.
He is really good. I also love the dynamic that like Nicholas Holt's like, you know, Edward Cullen looking like pretty boy to fill that quota, and you have Corddry like looking like George Costanza, and they're best friends anyway.
I do feel like it's worth mentioning, just for what it's worth. I had to look this person up. That the lead actress is Teresa Palmer. Just because we keep talking about Nicholas Hoult and Rob Corddry, and we're going to talk about John Malkovich and Dave
We're going to talk
Franco.
about being John Malkovich, if you will.
Oh, hey, look at that. But like the female leads in this movie have not gone on to really do anything. Sorry, Teresa Palmer, who was in Hacksaw Ridge, The Choice, and Lights Out as her top listed films outside of Warm Bodies.
You could do worse than those, honestly. No, I mean, like she, it's true though. She hasn't had the same, like, she's not in X-Men or Mad Max, right? Like,
yeah.
But she's pretty good in this. She's it's the performances.
They're good. I have no
work.
issue with any of them. I'm not. I just want to make it clear that we're not like slagging her off, and I just feel kind of bad because I'm like, we just keep talking, especially because we keep talking about Rob Corddry, who kind of steals the movie in a lot of ways. Like,
well, that is kind of his character though. In a comedy, like it is pretty common for like the bit character actor to, you know, steal a lot of the momentum. So yeah, I mean Teresa Palmer's putting in good work. Like she does what she has to. She sells like the serious like John John Malkovich soldier daughter thing, and like some of the more, I mean, you know, she's got to sell like falling in love with zombie Nicholas Hoult. And she does it. So I mean, you know, props to her.
Yeah. Cool. You good?
I think we're good. Yeah, I think we can move on to spoilers.
Great. Then before we do, as always, if you enjoy the podcast, follow us on Twitter at BADH_cast. I'm posting clips there now, too. I'm trying to build up some of our marketing, so you can expect more happening over there, maybe. We have a Patreon, patreon.com/BADHcast. I don't know what's going on with it right now. It's paused. Jackson and I still need to have a conversation about it. I don't know what you can do with it while it's paused. Check it out, I guess. See what's up. Next week, we're going to be talking about
Adaptation. Yep.
Adaptation. I keep wanting to call it Annihilation, and it is not that. Adaptation, a Charlie Kaufman, Spike Jonze movie, which means I'm probably going to have feelings about it because Charlie Kaufman movies hit me in a certain spot. We'll see what happens. I've never seen it. Jackson brought it to the podcast. A little bit of an inversion on Warm Bodies, which, hey, let's do it.
Yeah, so this one I did watch in high school. I haven't seen it since, but like I remember a lot of the bits in it really clearly. Like the reason I brought it to Sean's attention was because I was having a completely unrelated conversation, and another friend of mine like dropped a bit from Adaptation that like made me crack up and has held up really well. If Adaptation's as good as I remember, it might be like a top 5 movie of all time, like Jackson Keller movie. It's really fucking good. Hopefully.
And to be clear, because I haven't mentioned, I saw Warm Bodies way back in, not high school, technically college at this point, but just worth mentioning because I realized I hadn't yet and was talking about how Jackson had done this. This podcast, sometimes I think about the fact that the structure of this podcast is completely fucked, but that's just because both of us are so scatterbrained. It's great.
Yeah, we're just a couple guys, hanging out. It's a podcast.
I think, honest to God, a group of guys hanging out is called the podcast, right? Like, I think that's the scientific term for it.
We officially have the scientific nomenclature.
Okay, so let's talk about Warm Bodies in a little bit more of a spoilery way. How do we want to approach this? I have a thing that I want to talk about, but I don't know if it's necessarily where we want to open.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that either. Like this movie is, I guess I mentioned the writing is a little sloppy. Like, should I start there? I mean, that's like a criticism. Do we want to start on like, I think the problem is that like it's hard to talk about the specific things to praise because like a lot of it is just like a good bit that lands or just like a general vibe. I mean, I could say a broad thing that I think the movie does really well. I think for what it's worth, I did generally enjoy the first half of the movie more than the second half. Not the second half was bad, but I think it loses some of the more creative choices that go on in the first half. I especially like the thing that kind of got me on board at the beginning was that the use of voiceover and like the movie taking place from R's perspective was really creative. Like the fact that, you know, Nicholas Hoult has like a full narration sort of giving insight into the character, but that's a personality that like zombie Nicholas Hoult can't express. Like he tries, he grunts, but like, you know, especially at the very beginning, he just acts like a normal zombie for the most part. And even when he starts to, you know, regain his humanity, Jojo, like there are a lot of the fun of the story is like, you know, hearing him like say a thing in his brain and like have a plan and then like watch him be a zombie and fuck it up. Like they do that interplay really well. It's not just like we're speaking of adaptation, a meme from Adaptation, because it's partially about screenwriting, is that like, oh, like narration voiceover is kind of a lazy trope, you know, just to exposit things to the audience, but it doesn't have to be. It's used really well here, and I think that I really like that interplay, and it's understandable that we kind of lose that as R becomes more and more human, but that is a lot of my favorite stuff in the movie, which I think is what made me warm to the first half more, if you will. Haha.
I honestly, as I was watching this part, this is going to be a reference that I don't think Jackson's going to understand, and I think that the subset of people who will appreciate it is going to be very small. People who both enjoyed the DLC characters for Borderlands 2 and Warm Bodies. How's it going? Me?
Nobody commits to the bit harder, Sean. You stick to your guns, you beautiful angel.
You know what? I'm gonna fucking do it. I want to talk about this anyway because I did actually really appreciate this. Mostly because like it's something that I've thought about a lot, and I really think that there is some connection between the two. Mostly just in how it worked. And like I feel like, honest to God, this might be the Borderlands 2 reference might do a better job of explaining why it works because people will understand that because no one watched Warm Bodies. Plain and simple. So Krieg is a psycho in Borderlands 2, and what that means is they are a group of people. Psychos are a group of people who basically lost their mind after being abandoned on the planet of Pandora. And in Borderlands humor, run around yelling about like poop trains and like strip the flesh and salt the wound. Haha, lol, so random. I don't like Borderlands for its humor. It's generally not great. But Borderlands 2 had some really interesting and strong characters. And I think Krieg embodies that in a lot of ways. Like Krieg is basically R in that at one point, the siren Maya is like shooting some psychos and Krieg sees her and like falls in love with her in the same way, but like more in like a maybe you can help me type of way than like yeah, both physical attraction, but definitely like a please God help me. I'm trapped in my own mind and I am not saying what I want to say. And it's just really interesting because like he sees her and, you know, you hear him talking to himself like, you know, whatever you do, don't yell anything about a poop train. And the first words out of his mouth are like, I'm the conductor of the poop train. I've watched this video a lot. That is a direct quote, I promise. And so, you know, she panics and whatnot. And then like he hides behind a rock and keeps like trying to get himself to say something serious. And at one point, like at the end of the introductory clip, he's like, all right, tell her, you know, you're the most beautiful person I've ever seen. And that I need you to save me. You can do this. You as with your crazy psychic siren powers might be able to pull me out of this. And like obviously his psycho brain is not going to be able to say that, but it says something like thank you, or I don't remember the exact line there, but the movie ends with the internal monologue going, close enough, which is something that R distinctly says in this movie. So I'm very curious to know whether Borderlands 2 Krieg was influenced by Warm Bodies in some capacity. But that's the type of narration that I really like, and that's something that Krieg actually it continues on with throughout the game. Like the characters talk to themselves, but Krieg especially does. Like he'll yell, but like occasionally you'll just hear like under the din of everything else going on, like a very normal voice saying like, all this bloodshed is too much for me to bear. I feel my soul cracking underneath the weight of it all. But like it's
Jesus.
Yeah, no, Borderlands 2, like I've talked to you about this before. I genuinely wish I could get you to experience Borderlands 2 in a way that you would enjoy, because Borderlands 2 has some terrible writing, but it also has some of the best writing I have ever dealt with, like just character-wise. The DLC characters, Krieg in particular, is stellar as someone who is incredibly troubled, and the voiceover narration really underscores just how fucked up he is in a beautiful way. And Handsome Jack is a stellar villain. Like he's entirely ham-fisted and overwrought, but like so fascinating of a character study of someone who thinks he's absolutely in the right, but is clearly not, and is great for that. I'm sorry, I could talk about Borderlands 2 for a long time. Clearly.
Welcome to our Borderlands 2 episode.
I have a lot of thoughts on Borderlands 2 because it is genuinely a really interestingly written game, and there's a lot of really great characters to it. Play Borderlands 2 and the DLC. Tina's Assault on Dragon Keep is also really heartfelt, despite the fact that there are some issues with a lot of stuff. Sorry. Voiceover can be powerful, and the parallels between Borderlands 2 and Warm Bodies is apparent and very good. They both use this voiceover very powerfully to show an inner struggle of someone who can't outwardly express what they're feeling inside.
Yeah, no, that's a good way to put it. I think the comparison sounds apt. On a much lighter note, I'm a real sucker for any time a gag is capped off with someone going nailed it when they very much did not nail it. I'm a real sucker for that. And that was one of my favorite gags later on in the movie when they're trying to like sneak him in and like, you know, make him look like a real boy. And like, you know, he has to say hi to like this big soldier is like, oh.
Yeah, that's fucking great. No, there's some really good humor in this movie, just in general. Like, again, Rob Corddry, fucking stellar in general. But
it really rides that line really well of being self-aware without being like smarmy or overbearing. I feel like that's really difficult. Like, I feel like like it's popular to have very quippy like heroes, like especially, you know, everyone kind of takes after Marvel movies now, and like Iron Man.
Wait, hang on, I don't know what you're talking about here, Jackson. We don't get 300 of those a year. What?
Yeah, and like the thing that's so tiresome, and like, you know, there's a range. Like, there are some like, you know, quippy, sarcastic, like too cool for school, like movies and characters that I like. But in general, and when done poorly, it can be really exhausting. Like, oh, I get it. It's, you know, you're so above it all. But like, this movie knows when to play it straight, and it knows when to go for the gag and acknowledge sort of the ridiculousness of it. It's a very fine line.
Yeah, I mean, that internal smarminess is the type of thing that still drives me nuts. Like when people come out and be like, wow, look at this, we're doing this thing that's bad in movies, and then they do it anyway. Like,
yeah,
you're undoing what you're saying. And this movie sometimes plays tongue-in-cheek, but like, if it's doing so, it's usually subverting, or, you know, doesn't then double down on it and do it anyway. It's more a commentary and then move past type of thing, which is great. Like, that's what you want, like, to be self-aware enough to recognize that we're making a love story between a human and a zombie, but also, hey, it's a love story between a human and a zombie, and it's about human connection. And in general, like, this is another positive thing. The theme of it, not deep. If you think about it too hard, you start making some weird connections and comments. But like, clearly this is a movie that's not meant to be like super deeply analyzed. So we're doing it on our podcast where we super deeply analyze things. But I think that if you do treat this movie on the ground that it wants to be treated at, which is just like, hey, come on, enjoy this movie and walk away feeling good. Like, the theme is literally just like, hey, life is better with love in it, and you feel more connected and attached to people. And you know what? All right, movie, I'm not here to poo-poo that idea. I'm not that much of a cynical asshole. I'm on board.
It really is very sincere, and I appreciate that about it. Like,
yeah, it doesn't even pull back on that. Like, that's the type of thing that, like, if you'd made that in certain movies today, they'd be like, oh, well, that's too sincere. We have to pull back and, you know, end on somebody getting shot in the head or something as a final payoff to be like a stinger. Like, everything's great and love except for that guy who just died and, you know, undermines some of it. No, it just ends like, things are better now. We're happy. Move on.
Yeah, the very, very end I like a lot. And like, this is really well done, actually. Like, when they realize that, like, the power of love has brought R back to life. Like, nobody ever like says that, like, how ridiculous. Like, that never happens. Like, they're weirded out by it. They're confused, but they don't play it as like, you know, this completely obnoxious, like, yeah, we know how stupid this is thing. They just rolls with it. And like, the payoff to that is still really funny in like a dark way, that they realize that he's alive when John Malkovich shoots him and he bleeds and it hurts.
Yeah.
So you get a nice payoff where, like, you know, your romantic lead smooch, but it's also funny. And then John Malkovich does like the disapproving dad thing, and that's funny. And it's great. They balance it really, really well.
Yeah, and again, like, the big thing there is that it never gets smarmy about its thematic ideas. And if you do that in a movie, you throw away your themes. And this movie doesn't do that, and that's absolutely stellar. So do you want to dive into a little bit more of the problem territories?
Yeah, I guess, like, since I think you're starting off the more substantive critique, I guess, like, if I could just get my minor one out of the way, I do wish for a movie as, you know, clever as this, and I do think this movie generally is pretty clever. I mean, this plays into what you're gonna get us started talking about too, but I do wish that the movie didn't take quite as many shortcuts as it does to kind of get you to where it needs to go. Like the best example is this.
You're talking like narrative shortcuts for what it's worth, right?
Yeah, narrative shortcuts. Like, this we obviously need this plot point to happen, so we'll just kind of like blast through it. And the most obvious one, and yeah, I mean this really does play into what you're going to talk about, is that our ate Jules' boyfriend's brain.
Who is Dave Franco? And honest to God, best role of Dave Franco I've ever seen. Yeah, he dies in the first 5 minutes. I hate Dave Franco. I hate the Francos in general. I was happy.
Yeah, no, and like R fucking kills him, dude. Like, he doesn't just like bite him and turn him into a zombie. He like bashes his skull in and like chews on his brain like popcorn, and it's played really like funny
throughout the movie too. It's not like chews on his brain like popcorn once. It's like puts a handful of popcorn brain in his pocket to pop out and eat occasionally.
I like those scenes where he's like reliving his memories. I think that's a fun conceit and like a fun narrative idea. So that's not what I'm talking about here. What I'm talking about is the fact that one of the obvious like underlying tensions of the movie is that like you know what, I'm gonna say this. It's maybe the only good line of dialogue in a Bethesda game. It's in Skyrim, where you have to decide whether or not you're gonna kill Parthenax, the good dragon, voiced by Charles Martinet, Mario.
Oh my god.
So in that moment where like, like I can't remember the exact scenario, but someone's like, hey, Parthenax is a dragon, like all dragons are part of this horrible thing, you got to go put him down. And you have the option to like talk to him about it and say like, hey, like, are you like actually like evil? And he's like, yeah, like all dragons are born evil, but what is better, to be born good or to overcome your evil nature? And that's maybe the only good line of dialogue in a Bethesda game. But I think it's applicable here. And I think that idea is something that the movie is sort of interested in, and like this tension, you can feel it, that like we're rooting for R, even though he's a zombie, he's like a literal monster, like he did do a bad thing, he did do a boo-boo and crush Dave Franco's skull.
That's a word for it. Yeah, a boo-boo.
A boo-boo. I mean, a pretty big boo-boo. But in the movie, it seems like it's smart enough to be setting up that tension, and like there are scenes where you feel it. The one that really got me, that I thought we were finally going to get the payoff to it, is when R is going to eat the brain like popcorn on the plane, and he like sits down in the seat, and you can see him like look over his shoulder to check and make sure that Julie's asleep, and then he eats the brain and goes into like his like vision quest. I thought that was where we were going to get like, oh my god, wait, like this dude, this zombie dude that I've been humanizing and like, developing a friendship or relationship with, he's still a monster who eats people's brains. And I thought that's what was going to like trigger her running away, but she just kind of does. And then when we do get the resolution to that, where R like has to confess, like, I've killed your boyfriend, like,
cool,
we have a token.
Great. I'm sorry.
We have a token like split the party moment, but like as soon as they meet each other again, she's like, it's fine, he was Dave Franco anyway.
It's not even like it's barely even a split the party moment. Like she just like she bails, which is a split the party moment in entirely of itself. Except for the fact that like she doesn't seem mad. She's just like, no, I know. Okay, I'm gonna go to bed now. Good night. And then she's gone in the morning. And
the beat, I guess, like what I mean by narrative shortcut is that like that's a fine, like sensible narrative beat, but like it feels a little perfunctory. Like this is going to happen because it has to happen. So let's get this out of the way. We'll have our 10 minutes where they're separated, and then we'll get back to the story that we actually wanted to tell. And this is the most glaring one. There are a couple other moments like this, I feel like, but that's kind of what I mean by narrative shortcuts, where like there's some juicy stuff that like really could have elevated the movie into something like really, really great. And like they just kind of leave it there. And I think that's a good enough segue to go into what you want to talk about.
I think that's a very good segue to go into what I want to talk about, because that payoff is the problem.
Yes.
So this movie is very clearly a Romeo and Juliet, not homage, but like retelling, I think is a good way of putting it.
Yeah, like a remix of retelling, yeah.
Yeah. It boiling down even to the main characters being R and Julie, in case you didn't get it. I didn't until like 15 minutes left in the movie.
For what it's worth, I can't take too much credit being like, so obvious. I remember that people were clowning on the movie back in the day, of the zombie Twilight crowd by like saying, oh, it's R and it's Julie. Like, how cringe. Like, that was in the back of my mind. I remember a lot about this movie in the discourse for a movie I never saw.
Yeah, no fucking kidding. I mean, for me, it all clicked into place when he looked up and left at a balcony and basically said, oh, what soft light through yonder window breaks. And I'm like, oh, I knew this was Romeo and Juliet. And then I made a comment about it to Sam and went, oh, I see it now. But Romeo and Juliet, I am going to recap the plot for a minute here because it's important to what I'm getting at. I'm sorry if you know what Romeo and Juliet is about, as I imagine everyone does.
Some of us repress ninth grade.
That's fair. So Romeo and Juliet, you got the Capulets, you got the Montagues. I don't remember which side is on which. It doesn't really matter, but one of them is a Capulet, the other one's a Montague. The families hate each other, but you know what? These two, they want to get it on. And so they like meet up with each other and all drama happens and they both end up dead at the end of the play. Spoilers for Romeo and Juliet. But the crux of it is that these two want to get together because there's a mutual love and understanding between them. And by love and understanding, I of course mean they're like 16 and they're in fact just horny and don't understand what love is.
True.
Fucking Warm Bodies takes that premise of, well, some of us are Capulets and Montagues, some of us are living people, and some of us are corpses. Okay, weird premise from the start here, but you know what? We'll roll with it. We'll see what happens. The big difference beyond that is that at no point did Romeo kidnap Juliet.
True.
And at no point did Romeo seem to be able to kill Juliet at any given moment. There was never him just like Jay chilling with a knife like, so you love me now, right? Yeah? Great. Whereas in Warm Bodies, under the guise of saving Julie, he does like mark her with his blood, quote unquote blood, basically the ichor running through his veins, which tricks the other zombies into thinking that she's a zombie like them, and they leave, which theoretically is a saving moment, except for the fact that her friend just doesn't get eaten and pieces out, and clearly they would have been fine. Like, fucking R could have just been like, oh god, and they left and everyone would have been fine or whatever.
Big effing chat for that guy playing his PSP who almost got to level 5.
He was so close to level 5. Level 5 in what? I don't know. Fuck you. So he takes Julie back to the airport, which is the zombie home base of R. And while they're there, she's like, hey, you can, let me go at any point. And he's like, no, not safe. Like a liar, who basically wants to keep her there for a couple days because, he's like, oh, I'm feeling my humanity return, which in and of itself, like, the movie is kind of playing with this in a way where it feels like it's gonna pay off and be like, hey, this power differential sucks, and she doesn't want to get with him because he just kidnapped her, took her, and then held her essentially hostage against her will, and while she has been repeatedly saying, no, I don't want to be here, I would like to leave. And, like, it feels like the movie's going to say something about that. Like, she's not going to end up with him at the end of the movie. She's going to be like, no, I recognize your humanity, and I recognize that, I was instrumental to that, but that was still fucked, and you shouldn't do that, as opposed to rewarding this sort of bad behavior. This is something I was thinking a lot about after watching Pop Culture Detective's video on Harrison Ford, where it basically reinforces this idea of like, it turned out okay in the end, so I guess essentially kidnapping this woman was fine. And that's a bad message, and especially because you kidnap this woman and also are holding all of the power in the relationship at that moment.
Not just kidnapping this woman, but kidnapping her and like looming over her, like implicitly, like I can eat you at any time, lady.
And like, to be clear, as a viewer, we know he's not looming over her in that way. But from her perspective, it certainly seems that way, and that's some bad optics, my friends.
And I think the thing that's disappointing about like the last half to me is that in the first half it seems like the movie knows this. Like it seems like the movie like that scene where the part where he like, smears the fucking goop on her face is a great example of that. Like that got like like kind of like dark laugh out of me, because like that's sort of the tension and the comedy of it, like, the dark comedy, but the comedy nonetheless is that like, you have this literal monster doing all these like disgusting literal monster things, and from his perspective, it's fine, but like, you really get the sense, like you see her kind of shiver and be like, oh god, like what the fuck is happening? Like it feels like the movie is aware that this is happening and that this is gonna pay off in some way, and I feel like that's what makes eating Dave Franco's brain and her being just fine with it. Like that should have been the payoff to this in one way or another.
Yeah, and that's why it's the perfect segue, because it is a complete non-payoff. She just is fine with it. She's just fine with the fact that he ate her boyfriend and then held her hostage for a few days, and also is a very looming, threatening presence that really should have traumatized a person, and probably did in some capacity. Like, I don't know enough about Stockholm Syndrome. I'm not going to cite that here like one of those Belle has Stockholm Syndrome in Beauty and the Beast bullshit people. But I am just going to say, like, trauma's real, and that's a traumatizing experience to be kidnapped, held hostage by someone who could ostensibly, and for all intents and purposes, would kill you if they were not this zombie person.
I mean, it is kind of like Tucker and Dale in that way, and that like it's funny that you mentioned the Belle Stockholm Syndrome thing, because like again, as I mentioned last week, I've been on a big Lindsay Ellis kick, so I just rewatched both of her Beauty and the Beast videos, and that's apropos because like the thing about it's maybe a little weird that they went with the Romeo and Juliet like remix retelling, right? Because, at its core, like the sort of the trend that this movie was, greenlit on was more of a Beauty and the Beast trend, was more of Edward Cullen isn't very beastly. There is actually a book called Beastly that is Beauty and the Beast, but Twilight.
Editor's note, I am just now remembering that there is not only a book, but a movie and a Wii game, and I have, in fact, played the Wii game and watched the movie. I would not recommend either. I don't know, man. Robert Pattinson looks quite beastly to me.
I mean, he's quite beastly in the best possible way. Is the problem.
I mean, he really is.
I'm truth be told, like, only reason I'm at all interested in like a Batman reboot is that he is the Batman.
He's been doing weirder and weirder shit, and I am here for it.
He's been on a big Leo trajectory, and I do like me some Leo. And, he's going to go far, I hope. Maybe he'll eat a bear and get an Oscar. But, regardless, because the thing about, like, the Beauty and the Beast story is that sort of the refutation of that Lindsay Ellis video, which is great, you should watch it, is that, like, well, you could say that, sure, there are these problematic elements, and, I'm not here to ignore that, but, like, this is a story about, like, redemption and forgiveness, and the movie is, like, aware of this, and Belle has her moments where, like, she kind of asserts herself and has agency, and there's a lot more to it. So I think that, like, if you want your end goal of this, if you want to have this setup, this kind of Beauty and the Beast setup, I think you have two options. You have to go darker. You have to go darker comedy where, like, I mean, maybe really into that Romeo and Juliet shit where like, it doesn't work out for poor old R. Or, like you do have more of that like actual like character reckoning with the dynamic, because I don't think they would want to do that. I think that just like based on the audience, based on the source material, the tone is light. I wouldn't necessarily want the movie to go super dark in that regard. But like there's a way to have like some real character growth and like atonement and like to make you feel better about where that relationship goes, because it's less like, R has to do any sort of like genuine character growth and like come to terms for like what his like his literal like a monsterhood means and like how that like impacted their relationship. And it's less just like, oh, he's so misunderstood, which is the toxic thing. That is the incel thing we were talking about with Tucker and Dale.
The parallels are definitely there. And I think that it's very easy to write off both this and Tucker and Dale as just being like, oh, it's cute and it's a misunderstanding in a lot of ways, but like it's important to see that the media literacy of recognizing that, yeah, the movie isn't treating it seriously, but it is pretty serious, y'all, is very important. So that's why I wanted to bring it up, despite the fact that, yeah, I mean, I still like this movie, and I think it does a lot with that. It's still hashtag problematic.
Yeah, and like, I don't know if like, maybe there's something a little hashtag problematic inherently about like the Beauty and the Beast setup, right? But like you can make a movie that has that awareness. And I guess what's disappointing is that like it seems for a while that the movie does have that awareness, and then
that first half feels so much like it had. I very much was uncomfortable with the first half, but like I was pushing myself through it because I'm like, A, it's a good movie and I'm enjoying myself with it, but B, it feels aware enough to know that what it is doing is weird. Like it feels like it's about to pay off with something. And I do, at least in part, wonder if there was some changes on the back end, because I could see that happening.
It's completely possible. Yeah, like all right. So this was based on a book, so like I could be totally talking out of my ass. This could have been in the book. Did the existence of the Bonies feel weird to you? Like they were put in there to like have a more actiony climax, and that like the actual tension was like resolving the relationship, but we needed some more zombie action,
I don't know, honestly. They didn't really bother me in general.
They weren't like a big problem for me, but like it did kind of feel like we just sort of mentioned they exist at the beginning until they're a problem again at the very end. You know what I mean?
I mean, they had enough reminders in there that I don't think that it really ever fully got to me. Like they were interwoven enough that they never jumped out. And like the ending, I think that I really just think the problem is that the back half feels kind of different in a lot of ways. Like I think in general it takes kind of a lighter tone, even beyond like the weird darkness of the first half. And I wonder if that is just like notes from the studio being like, hey, this is what you're doing here. This is pretty dark. Knock that off.
Yeah, it definitely could be a reshoot thing. Which I mean, again, I could be totally off base with like the Bonies, but that does feel like something like, oh, we need a more direct villain. Like, not that had to be a studio note, but that could very easily have been a studio note.
I mean, the Bonies by themselves could still theoretically have come into play, factored in a big way. Like, and the original intent could have been an awareness of what was going on, and everyone dies as a result of it, or something, or like he sacrifices himself to the Bonies as penance for his actions, or whatever. Like, the looming threat of the Bonies feel natural to the world, but like how they pay off in the end, I can kind of see what you're getting at.
Yeah, no, because I like with the setup, like I think it's a decent enough setup, that like thing of like regaining humanity and sort of the simple redemption of love and human connection that like the Bonies, they're the people who like give up and are kind of consumed by like their loneliness and stuff like that. Like there's definitely room for that, but yeah, like something about the way they're played in the finale, it doesn't feel that satisfying. It's not bad. It's not like. I look at it and I'm like, oh, like I really wish the Bonies weren't here. But it feels like Yeah, we're missing a little bit of that sauce.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I do think that like the idea of the bonies representing loneliness is solid. I like that with the themes that we have going on of acceptance and connection and whatnot, and also that dude peeling his face off was pretty gnarly in a really great way.
No, yeah, that was really great. And yeah, I totally agree. Like it might have been studio notes. It might even have been, I'm not sure if the original book was technically YA. Like because of the trend that this was, kind of a part of, you want to assume it's YA, but it might not have been. But if it was, I mean, that's pretty common in YA to like, it's a very trend focused market. So like even if in the original source material, like maybe the original draft went a little bit darker, and the editor was like, we can't sell this to Twilight moms if it ends with R getting his fucking face ripped off, rewrite it.
So I looked up the book a bit here just because we're talking about it, and it feels like it's probably worthwhile to have an understanding of what we're talking about. First of all, just gut instinct. I know you don't judge a book by its cover, but fuck it, I'm going to a little bit here. It is a dark looking cover in a way that doesn't necessarily scream YA to me.
I buy that 100%. YA covers tend to be pretty uniform because, again, it is a very trend-focused market, so that makes sense to me.
Yeah, this looks more like just a horror-focused book. Jackson, if you want to look up the book really quick while I'm talking about it, I think you'll see what I mean.
Sure, yeah.
But even beyond that, the genre is listed as like post-apocalyptic fiction, gothic fiction, paranormal romance, black comedy. Google doesn't list it as YA either. And I mean, looking through some of the plot synopsis, it definitely, like, the book is way closer to Romeo and Juliet. Like there is this like thought of both of them killing themselves and a lot more going on with that, but it does look fairly similar with how it pays off. The bonies are definitely there, but it does feel like the book might have kept a darker tone longer than the movie did.
I see.
Do you see what I mean by the cover though?
I can go either way on this, honestly. Like I'm thinking back to it definitely, like the colors are definitely more like horror novel, but that splash of red, like I know it's coming out of his head, but
no, you're gonna say it kind of has a parallel to like the apple of Twilight, because that's what I was thinking about too. No, I am for sure, but like the vibe I get from it is more like a Darren Shan book, who wrote the Cirque du Freak novels as well as like the City of Devil series, which tended to be a lot more focused on the horror and blood of it than anything else, like the general just scariness of this is a horror series, which is why like it might still slot technically into that YA troping, but like in general it feels more horror focused than romance. Like it's like focus on the horror with like that twinge of the Twilight apple to it.
Yeah, I think that's probably about right. That's probably what they said to the graphic designers.
We should end this episode. We're going a little bit long here, and I can't believe we went long on a Warm Bodies episode. We were genuinely worried that we were not going to have enough to talk about before we watched this movie.
But it turned out to be a charming, great time. Not without its problems, but very much worth watching. I guess before we go, last thing I want to say about it is that while we're deep into spoilers, I don't mind at all that the movie went so hard on the R+J thing. Like, what I really, really like about that is that they had a really easy opportunity. Like, I was sort of, like, clenching up, thinking about the end. Like, say, now that you're human, do you remember your name? And, like, either he just says that it's Romeo or, like, he's about to say it and cut to credits, and that would have been a real groaner. But instead, like, they actually go for something that's, like, thematically on point and, like, really meaningful with, like, R talking about, like, no, like, I don't really care about my old life anymore. Like, I'm basically a new person. I'm here and we'll go with the future. I like, R is my name. It's been my name. Like the Chad Solid Snake in Metal Gear Solid 2. You can find your own name and your own future. I mean, anything that reminds me of Solid Snake is a good thing. And
yeah, okay, fuck off. So for what it's worth, I also agree that this ending is actually really good, and I like that the R kind of also does a lot to kind of buck the Romeo and Juliet like apparentness of it, because it's definitely a Romeo and Juliet thing, but it's very much also saying like, It is, but we're gonna say no. We're our own thing in a lot of ways, and I like that. And I didn't have to reference Metal Gear Solid because I spent 20 minutes referencing Borderlands 2 earlier. It's great.
To be fair, I think that's the first time you've ever referenced Borderlands 2. I mean, I really would be curious to see a percentage if some, like, you know, dedicated super fan went through every episode and calculated the percentage of episodes where I make a Metal Gear reference.
Don't think I didn't notice that you snuck a JoJo reference in there too. I heard that. I chose not to comment, but I heard it.
You know what the worst part of that is?
You didn't remember doing it?
No, I did remember doing it. But the worst part of that is, speaking of YA, I wrote a YA novel, and there's a more obvious JoJo reference that I can't admit, so it's not actually there in the title. But also, I slipped in that exact same reference into the dialogue at one point.
You know, I was gonna, when your book comes out, use this platform to, you know, boost your book and let people know where you can buy it and support you as an author. I am going to censor legitimately all of it. I'm just gonna put, just from now on, whenever I'm Sean McKinda, you can find me on Twitter at Sean_McKinda, and you're gonna go, and I'm Jackson Keller, and you can.
No. See, it'll be like the villain of Part 5 Stand, King Crimson, who can.
I am Sean McKinda. You can find me on Twitter at Sean_McKinda.
And I've been Jackson Keller. You can find me on Twitter at.
And if you want to follow the podcast, that's at BADH_cast on Twitter. As I said, hopefully I'll be tweeting more from there. I keep threatening to do that and then not doing it because I get busy with shit, but we'll see. Maybe this time I'll actually stick with it. Who knows? Patreon.com/BADHcast. I don't know what's going on with it. You can check out it if you want to. Also, thanks to Loads of High With Use. Our theme song, it is Suicide, alternate take off the album High Octane, The Low Expectations. They're a wonderful band, and you should go check them out however you can. Support them, stream their music, buy their music on Bandcamp, wherever else you can buy music. Do it now. Also, thanks to 25yearslatersite.com. There's a little button of us in the corner that you can go click on. It'll take you to our website and all that good shit. But you should also stick around 25yearslatersite.com and read some of the articles because there's a bunch of really talented people doing a bunch of really talented writing. I know there's a lot coming up on their website here in February. It's Twin Peaks month for them, and that's always a huge deal. So go support that shit. Next week, we're going to talk about adaptation. I don't know how I'm going to feel about it yet, but Jackson wanted to, so here we are.
Listen, Adaptation is a movie starring Nicolas Cage, playing Charlie Kaufman, the writer of Adaptation. And not only is Nicolas Cage playing Charlie Kaufman, he's playing Donald Kaufman as well, who is Charlie Kaufman's fictional twin brother. So obviously it's the greatest movie of all time.
It's going to be a movie that's pretty far up its own ass, I feel like. And that's not a criticism. I haven't seen it yet, but bye.
Don't you go into the ground. Don't you go